Chapter-7 God. We have come to the conclusion that 2 out of the 3 subjects of our inquiry, namely the world and the soul, are unreal as such. We need to inquire now into the truth of the concept of God. This part of the inquiry is very easy, because the conclusion is not in doubt. The 3, namely the world, soul, and God, are one single indivisible whole, because each implies the other 2. In fact, the first member, the world, includes the second and third. The name world means the totality of all distinct objects of thought. It implies and includes all inanimate objects, all sentient creatures, and the one cause of all of these. The world of persons and things is an effect, the experience of which is inconceivable without the cause that permeates and sustains the effect, just as you cannot perceive a pot without being aware of its cause or set of causes. Thus it happens that the 3 are practically one for this inquiry. We cannot regard 1 or 2 of these 3 as unreal, and the remainder as real. As an ancient analogy is that of the hen, which has been given to us by the sage Sankara. He points out that one cannot cut her into 2, intending to cook and eat one part, and to reserve the other for laying eggs. He should forego one of these purposes and be content with the other. That is, he must cook and eat the whole hen, or keep her alive for laying eggs. Just in the same way, we must reject the whole of this threefold entity as unreal, in the special sense of the word as used in Advaitic metaphysics, or accept the whole of it as real in the sense in which materialists as well as theists call it real. There is no middle course. The idea of God is relative to the ideas of the world and the soul. The world, restricting it to the totality of insentient objects, is the opposite of God, in that it is inert and without consciousness, whereas God is endowed with infinite consciousness. The soul is opposite to God because it is finite as compared to God, who is infinite. Thus God is a member of 2 pairs of opposites, and the opposites have an existence only for the ego mind. Therefore, God is not an objective reality. There is another consideration also. Considered as one of the 3, not as he really is, God is an object of thought. God is one of the triad of relation, namely the thinker, the object, and the act of thinking. And all triads exist in the realm of ignorance by virtue of the ego. Therefore, God is not an objective reality. This is clearly expressed by the sage in the following when he said, "The triads of all arise, depending on the ego sense. So too arise the pairs of opposites. If one enters the heart by the quest, 'Who am I?' and sees the truth of it, that is, the real self, all of them will vanish utterly. Such a one is a sage, and is not deluded by these." If we can abstract from the world these pairs of opposites and triads of 3, then nothing will be left of it, except perhaps space and time. And these 2, we have seen, are not objective realities. What remains over on the extinction of the ego is the real self, Atman, alone, which is not divisible into parts. Here we have one more proof of the unreality of God as such. It is asserted by the sages that separate from the real self, there is no God in the egoless state, and separateness is the very essence of the idea of God as God. In fact, where there is no separateness, there can be no ideas at all. God as he really is not an object of thought. The truth about God is that he is no other than the real self, otherwise described as reality or pure consciousness, the absolute. As such, God is not a person and is not related to the world of persons and things in any way. The relation of cause and effect, which is usually said to exist between the reality and the world, is not real at all. If reality were related in any way to anything, it would not be reality, as defined by the sages. That God, as he really is, and the real self are one and the same, is the central theme of the Upanishads, as we have seen from the text cited by Shankara. This identity is not merely stated as a fact, it is emphasized in all possible ways. Penalties are decreed for those who do not receive the teaching, and blessings are pronounced on those that accept the teaching and earnestly strive to realize the truth in their own direct experience. As the quote goes, he that serves a separate deity, thinking he is one and I am another, is ignorant. He is like a quadruped for the gods in heaven. When one becomes immovably fixed in identity, without fear, with this invisible, unembodied, indefinable, placeless one, then he attains fearlessness. When one makes the least division in this one, there is fear for him. That is the real cause of fear, in the case of him that wrongly knows the truth of the self. These are from the Upanishads. And the final Upanishad states, he that sees as if there were difference here goes from death to death. God, as he really is therefore nameless, formless, and without attributes of any kind. If God had attributes, he would be in relativity, and therefore unreal. This is the ultimate truth about God as revealed by the sages. Of course, it gives rise to an apparent difficulty in giving an account of creation. The difficulty is got over by the sage Shankara by distinguishing between reality in its true nature and reality as it's conceived for the purpose of teaching as the origin of the world. This former one is called Para-Brahman, and the latter Apara-Brahman. They are also called Nirbija and Sabija, or Nuguna and Saguna. The latter is also called Ishvara, or the personal God. There are those who confound the two and claim that God actually became all this multiplicity. They rely on texts of the ancient lore, which literally understood, and without any reference to the final teaching as conveyed by other texts occurring later in the same books, seem to be in their favor. The commentaries abound in arguments to show that a literal interpretation of these texts is improper. The question is set at rest for us by the clear utterances of the sage of Arunachala. One such pronouncement of the sage goes as follows. Even the statement that duality is real, so long as one is striving to win the goal, but that in the goal there is no duality, is not at all correct. What else but the 10th man was the one in the parable, both when he himself was anxiously seeking the 10th man as the one that was missing, and when he had found himself to be the missing 10th man. Here the word even signifies that a creed not mentioned is also wrong. That is, two different creeds are here condemned. One of them is implicitly condemned, and the other explicitly. The first one is that duality is true always, and persists even in the state of deliverance. The second is that duality is true for the present, and until non-duality is achieved by some method of spiritual endeavor. The former is the creed of the dualist. The passage cited above takes it as unquestionable that this creed is incorrect, having regard to the direct experience of the self in the egoless state, which the sages have. The latter is also incorrect because of the peculiar definition of reality that the sages have given. If duality were real in the sense of the definition, it would endure forever. There would be no possibility of non-duality realized or brought about by any means whatsoever. Besides, if non-duality in the egoless state be allowed to be an effect of the pursuit of the quest or other means, then it would be unreal, having a beginning, and it would have an end. An effect can endure only so long as it is sustained by its causative force. It is an axiom of the Upanishads that a finite cause, a course of activity, can never produce an infinite effect. The authors appeal to our common experience to prove this, if proof be needful. It is nobody's case that the state of deliverance is other than endless. Even those who conceive of that state as becoming a denizen of the world of some sort do not allow that there is to be a return from it to a lower state of existence. Those dualists that maintain the continuance of difference in deliverance are at least logical in their claim. Of course, they are unable to fit into their creed the testimony of the sages. They achieve their object by rejecting that testimony. Those dualists that seek to reconcile the experience of the sages with their own creed are up against a dilemma. If they claim that difference is real, while ignorance persists, they would have to say that deliverance has a beginning. But they are unwilling to admit the inevitable consequence that it would also have an end. If they admit that it is both beginningless and endless, they would be logically driven to the conclusion that difference is altogether an illusion, as the Advaitas say. The parable just referred to is as follows, and it goes a little deeper. 10 men from a village crossed a river, and then they counted themselves to make sure that all had safely crossed over. But as each man left himself out in the counting, it seemed to them that they were only 9, so they concluded that the 10th man was lost. While they were bewailing the lost man, someone came up to them and inquired the cause of their sorrow. They told him that there should be 10 of them, but that one was lost. The newcomer found that they were mistaken. He counted exactly 10, and he saw also how it was that they came to think they were only 9. They had made a mistake in the counting. To convince them that they were 10, he asked someone to count the strokes he would deal on their backs. The last stroke he reserved for the counter. When the latter had counted 9 strokes, the stranger dealt one to him also, and thus 10 strokes were counted, showing that there were 10 men in fact. If the counter had counted right before, he would have found that he himself was the 10th man. So he was the 10th man all along, both before and after his discovery. No new man was brought from elsewhere. He that was the 10th at the time of his discovery was the 10th even before. So the real self is the only reality all the time, both before and after the extinction of ignorance.